downtown streets of San Francisco buzzed with the usual symphony of life. Car horns, distant chatter, and the occasional outburst of street performers. Amidst the hustle, a homeless man sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, his wiry beard and weathered skin telling the story of countless nights spent under the open sky. His sign, scrawled in shaky handwriting, simply read, "Need $1 for food. God bless." He wasn't used to asking directly. Most people walked past as if he were invisible, their faces glued to their phones or their eyes fixed straight ahead. But today, something felt different. A strange energy in the air. He couldn't quite explain it, but he decided to act on it. As the homeless man, who called himself Roy, glanced up, his eyes locked onto a figure walking toward him. Tall, lean, and dressed casually in a gray hoodie and basketball shorts. The man's face was obscured by a baseball cap. Something about his stride seemed familiar, though Roy couldn't place why. Roy hesitated, clutching his small paper cup. The man was almost upon him when he gathered the courage to call out, "Hey man, can you spare $1?" The man stopped in his tracks, glancing down at Roy. He pulled his cap back slightly, revealing a face that was unmistakable to anyone who'd ever seen a basketball game. Stephen Curry. Roy blinked, his mind racing. He had no idea he'd just asked one of the greatest NBA players of all time for $1. Curry crouched slightly, bringing himself eye level with Roy. He gave a small, warm smile and said, "Why $1?" The question caught Roy off guard. He shrugged, feeling a little defensive. "It's not much, right? Just enough to get me by." Stephen tilted his head, studying him for a moment. Then, to Roy's shock, he didn't pull out $1. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "What's your name?" Roy hesitated. Roy. Okay, Roy. How about this? I don't want to just give you $1. I want to hear your story first." Roy was stunned. People didn't usually care about his story. Most avoided even making eye contact. But something about Curry's tone was sincere. So, he began talking, sharing bits and pieces of his life. How he'd once worked as a carpenter. How a series of bad breaks had left him homeless. And how he was now struggling to make it through each day. Curry listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Roy finished, he leaned back and said, "What if I could help you get more than $1?" Roy frowned. "What do you mean?" Curry stood up, stretching his legs. "Wait here," he said, walking toward a black SUV parked nearby. Roy watched in confusion as Curry disappeared inside for a moment, only to return holding a basketball. Roy squinted at him. "What are you doing?" Stephen grinned. "We're going to have some fun. If you can make a shot, I'll give you something better than $1. Deal?" Roy glanced down at his hands, calloused and unsteady. "Man, I haven't touched a basketball in years. Doesn't matter. Let's see what you've got." Curry gestured to a nearby makeshift hoop that a group of kids had set up down the street. A small crowd began to gather, curious about the scene unfolding. Roy reluctantly got to his feet, his knees creaking. He took the ball, feeling its weight in his hands. The kids cheered him on as he lined up his shot. With a deep breath, he launched the ball toward the hoop. It wasn't pretty, but it went in. The crowd erupted in cheers. Roy stared in disbelief as Curry clapped him on the back. "Nice shot, man. Now, let me show you something." What happened next would change Roy's life forever. Stephen Curry held up a hand to quiet the crowd. His expression shifted from playful to serious as he turned to Roy. "Roy, you've got heart. You might not know it, but I can see it. Now let me ask you this. If you could start over, what would you do differently?" Roy hesitated. No one had asked him such a question in years. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at the ground before speaking. I'd want to work again, be useful, do something real with my hands like I used to, maybe even build something I could be proud of." Curry nodded thoughtfully. "All right, then let's build something together. But first, let's make sure you've got the basics. Follow me." Roy's eyes widened as Curry gestured toward the black SUV. The crowd, sensing something extraordinary was happening, trailed behind at a respectful distance. When they reached the vehicle, Curry opened the back and revealed several duffel bags. He pulled one out, unzipped it, and handed Roy a wad of bills wrapped in a rubber band. "This is $5,000. It's not a gift. It's a challenge. You're going to use this to turn your life around. No excuses. Think you can do that?" Roy's hands trembled as he took the money. His voice was barely a whisper. Why are you doing this?" Curry smiled, his eyes kind but firm. Because I've been blessed, and I believe in paying it forward. But I'm not done yet. There's something else I want you to do. He handed Roy a business card. This is the address of a gym nearby. Be there tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. sharp. No exceptions. You'll find out why then. The next morning, Roy stood outside the gym, his nerves jangling. He'd spent the night tossing and turning, wondering if the whole encounter had been some elaborate dream. But the card in his hand was real, and so was the money now tucked safely in his pocket. At precisely 7 a.m., a sleek car pulled up, and Stephen Curry stepped out, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Glad you made it, Roy. Ready to work? Roy nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was ready for. Inside the gym, Curry introduced him to a man named Greg, a trainer who specialized in working with individuals recovering from hardships. Roy, this is Greg. He's going to help you get back on your feet, literally and figuratively. The first step is building strength, discipline, and confidence. You up for it? Roy blinked, overwhelmed. I think so. Good, Curry said, clapping him on the shoulder. You've got more potential than you realize. Let's unlock it. Weeks turned into months. Under Greg's guidance, Roy began transforming, not just physically, but mentally. He showed up every day, rain or shine, pushing himself harder than he ever thought possible. Curry checked in regularly, sometimes joining him for workouts, other times just offering words of encouragement. Roy's newfound confidence extended beyond the gym. Using part of the money, he found a small apartment and started taking carpentry jobs again. His hands, once idle and shaky, now built tables, chairs, and cabinets that customers raved about. One afternoon, as Roy finished sanding a wooden table in his modest workshop, he heard a knock at the door. Opening it, he was stunned to see Curry standing there with a camera crew. What's this? Roy asked, bewildered. Curry grinned. Roy, I wanted to show you something. He stepped aside, revealing a long line of people outside. Neighbors, former clients, and even some of the kids who cheered him on that first day. They held signs with messages like, Roy, you inspire us, and thank you for your kindness. Roy's throat tightened as Curry handed him a plaque. This is for you, Roy, to remind you of what you've accomplished. It says, from $1 to a new beginning. Tears filled Roy's eyes as he looked out at the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt like he truly belonged. And it all started with one simple question. Can you spare $1? Months later, just as Roy's carpentry business began to thrive, disaster struck. Late one evening, a fierce thunderstorm rolled through the city. Roy's small workshop, located in a rented storage unit, wasn't built to withstand such weather. The next morning, he arrived to find the roof partially collapsed and most of his tools and projects ruined. He stood there in shock, rainwater pooling around his feet. The table he'd been working on, a custom order for a high-paying client, was reduced to splinters. His savings weren't enough to cover the damages or replace his tools. Feeling defeated, Roy slumped against the wall, staring at the chaos. Why now? Just when things were looking up. That night, as he sat in his apartment, pondering his next move, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Stephen Curry. Haven't heard from you in a while. How's everything going? Roy hesitated. He didn't want to burden Curry with his problems, but something told him to respond honestly. Lost my workshop in the storm. Don't know how to bounce back from this. Curry replied almost immediately. Hang tight. I'll call you in the morning. The next day, Curry showed up at Roy's apartment with another surprise. We're taking a little drive, he said, motioning toward his car. Roy, confused but curious, climbed in. They drove for nearly an hour before pulling up to an industrial building with "For Lease" sign out front. Curry led him inside, revealing a spacious, well-lit workshop outfitted with state-of-the-art carpentry tools. Roy froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. What is this? Curry smiled. It's yours, Roy. Consider it an investment in your future. You'll pay it back when you're ready, no rush. Tears welled up in Roy's eyes as he stepped into the space. It was more than he could have ever dreamed of. Why are you doing all this for me? He asked. Curry's voice softened. Because someone once took a chance on me when I was down. Now it's my turn to do the same for someone else. With the new workshop, Roy's business flourished. Word of his craftsmanship spread, and clients from across the city sought him out. But success came with its own set of problems. One day, Roy received a call from a wealthy developer who wanted to place a massive order, custom furniture for an upcoming luxury hotel. The payout would be life-changing, but the timeline was impossibly short. Roy hesitated. I'd love to take the job, but I'm just one guy. I don't think I can handle it alone. The developer scoffed. Then maybe you're not as good as people say you are. The word stung, but instead of backing down, Roy decided to rise to the challenge. He reached out to other struggling craftsmen he'd met on the streets, offering them temporary work in his workshop. I know what it's like to feel overlooked, he told them. Let's prove we're worth more than people think. The group worked tirelessly, pulling late nights and early mornings to meet the deadline. When the project was finally complete, the developer was blown away by the quality. I underestimated you, he admitted. This is some of the finest work I've ever seen. But just when Roy thought life had finally settled, he uncovered a dark secret. While cleaning his new workshop one evening, he found an envelope wedged behind a cabinet. Inside was a stack of papers. Old deeds, contracts, and invoices. One name kept appearing, Marshall Industries. Roy recognized it immediately. It was the company that had laid him off years ago, setting off the chain of events that led to his homelessness. Confused and angry, Roy did some digging. He learned that the very building housing his workshop had once belonged to Marshall Industries. Worse, the company had deliberately avoided paying severance to dozens of employees, including Roy, to cut costs before closing down. Roy sat in his workshop late into the night, the stack of documents spread across his workbench. Each page deepened his anger. The company that had shattered his life had not only stolen from him but countless others. Now, by a cruel twist of fate, his redemption story was tied to the very building they had abandoned. But Roy wasn't the man he used to be, silent and powerless. He had found his voice, his confidence, and a growing circle of people who believed in him. If they think they can get away with this, they're wrong, Roy muttered to himself, gripping one of the papers tightly. The following morning, Roy called Stephen Curry and told him everything. Curry listened intently, his tone serious when he finally responded. This isn't just about you, Roy. If what you're saying is true, Marshall Industries owes a lot of people justice. Let's make this right. But you'll need help. Roy nodded. I can't let this go, but I don't know where to start. Start with a lawyer, Curry said. I'll put you in touch with someone I trust. They'll know how to dig deeper into this. Roy met with a sharp and determined lawyer named Vanessa. After reviewing the documents, Vanessa's eyes widened. This is a goldmine, she said. Marshall Industries not only evaded paying severance but also committed fraud by misrepresenting their financials before shutting down. If we pursue this, it could lead to a class action lawsuit. Roy's heart raced. Class action? You mean I could help the others they screwed over? Vanessa nodded. Exactly. But it won't be easy. Marshall's executives will fight back hard. As Vanessa worked on the case, Roy decided to take another bold step. He reached out to the local media, offering his story to a respected journalist. Within days, headlines read, "Former homeless man takes on corporate giant that ruined his life." The article went viral, and soon other former employees of Marshall Industries came forward with their own stories. Each testimony painted a grim picture of a company that had preyed on its workers. The backlash against Marshall Industries was swift. Their former executives, now living lavish lives, faced mounting public pressure. But not everyone was happy with Roy's crusade. Late one night, as he locked up his workshop, he noticed a black car parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and the engine idled softly. Roy's gut told him something wasn't right. As he walked away, the car crept forward, its headlights casting long shadows. When he turned the corner, the car sped off, tires screeching. Shaken, Roy called Vanessa and Curry. I think someone's trying to intimidate me, he said. Curry didn't hesitate. I'll make some calls. We'll get security around you. You're not in this alone. Months of tension, media attention, and legal battles finally came to a head. Marshall Industries' former CEO, under immense pressure, agreed to settle the lawsuit. The terms included a substantial payout to the affected workers and a public apology. For Roy, the victory was bittersweet. While the settlement was a step toward justice, it couldn't erase the years of pain he and others had endured. With his share of the settlement, Roy made an unexpected announcement. Standing in his workshop, surrounded by the people who had supported him, he declared, "I'm opening a community center, a place where people can learn skills, find work, and rebuild their lives, just like I did. It's time to pay it forward." Curry, standing beside him, clapped him on the back. "You've come a long way, Roy. This is just the beginning." Roy's community center quickly became a beacon of hope, offering free workshops and mentorship to those in need. The people who once doubted him now celebrated his resilience. One day, as Roy stood outside the center, he noticed a man sitting nearby, looking lost, just as he once had. Roy approached him, handing over $1 with a knowing smile. "This is how it all started for me," Roy said. The man looked up, confused but grateful. As Roy walked back inside, he couldn't help but feel proud. His journey from despair to purpose had come full circle, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark incredible change.